Hey everybody, Doc Parsley here on this cold, wet, gloomy uh, Texas morning. Just got back from my old man walk. Hair's a little wet, so apologize if it don't look pretty. Um, I had several ideas on the ticker for what I was going to do today, but I'm going to do this one first at the behest of one of my old-time friends and from high school. Jennifer, I won't say her last name, but you know who you are, aka Shorty. Um, she responded to one of my videos about the numbers, what's, putting some rationality and relativity to these numbers. So, what about this whole airborne fiasco? Is this virus airborne? So, first, let's talk about what airborne means versus um, droplet spread, like spread through interpersonal distance, right? And then let's talk about what do we do about it? Like, what are the different approaches for the different ways that things could be communicable? And then we'll talk about what can we do. There's different approaches. We know the different approaches. What can we do? What should we do? And what should we make of whether or not this is airborne? So airborne means that it's floating around in the air. It is much bigger than a molecule, but it is a infinitesimally small thing. Yeah, it's so small that it has to be seen with an electron microscope. Like it is tiny, tiny, tiny thing. That is, and not just this virus, all viruses. This is slightly smaller than the influenza virus, not hugely smaller. Influenza is rough, somewhere in the ballpark of 100 nanometers. This is in the ballpark of 80 nanometers. So if can something 80 nanometers float in the air, and is 80 to 100 a big enough difference to know if it's going to float in the air? And it's the answer is that we definitely 100% know that we don't know, because it matters. It has to be done. You have to think about it contextually. So under what situation, under what circumstances can it float in the air? So think of it like a dust particle, right? Dust particles are too small to be seen by the naked eye, but once enough of them fall into your picture frames, you can see them and dust them off. And these are much, much larger than viruses. So, it's not just about the diameter of it, though. If you think about, a balloon just full of regular air, you can pop it up and it'll kind of linger and take a while to settle to the ground. That's the way to think of these viruses, is that they are heavier than air, but they're settling down as a feature of how much mass they have, so how much surface area they're presenting to the air, and how heavy are they. So think about a balloon versus a pebble. Well, a pebble's a lot smaller, but a pebble doesn't float. If you drop both of them, the balloon's going to hit the ground a lot slower, right? And anybody arguing that because of gravity, remember that air pressure can keep something afloat, and that's why there's a difference between dropping a feather and a bowling ball. So if we say, okay, this is small enough to particleize and be floating around in the air, okay, what does that mean? Versus what we thought before. What we thought before is that somebody had to sneeze or cough, and in doing so, even if you can't see it, you're releasing some what we call sputum, which is just like little droplets of your saliva, or other fluids that are in this area, kind of below your sinuses and back to your throat. Like that area, you can cough stuff out of that area. You can sneeze stuff out of that area. And it can be in an infinitesimally small droplet of water or sputum, and the virus can float around in there. But because it's in this water droplet, it's going to fall faster than if it weren't in that water droplet. So can it fly out there and be out there without the water droplet is the only thing we're asking. The answer is probably. However, the answer for the influenza is probably, almost certainly. Like there's research that shows it, influenza can be airborne. So let's talk about, if we can just admit that it's most likely airborne, let's talk about what do we do about that. So there's a lot of debate right now. Should I be wearing a mask? Do I need an N95 mask? Can I use a surgical mask? Can I wrap my mouth in a scarf? Yes. The answer to all of that is yes. And it depends on what you're talking about and what you're trying to achieve. And this will get into the real meat of it. So what we're trying to achieve with a mask is not necessarily, though to a small degree, and depending on the population, this could be true, but we're not necessarily trying to prevent you from breathing the virus in. We're trying to prevent you from pushing the virus out. And in doing so, if everybody is covering their mouths and reducing the amount of virus they're putting in the air, well, then there's less virus for people to get. And there's a couple of factors. There's a couple of factors that can help with. So one of those factors is that we're decreasing the overall volume in the air, which means it's less likely to get into somebody who's going to handle it poorly, whose immune system is shot, or they have comorbidities. And the most obvious and dangerous comorbidity right now is age. Let's just say that's the truth. And so the more that's out there, the more likely these people are going to be infected. But the other portion of this, and probably the most likely thing that's happening with the healthcare providers, you're hearing a lot about healthcare providers going on ventilators and even dying, and they're in their 30s and 40s and they're otherwise healthy. So what gives? I thought this is only killing the elderly and infirm. Well, it actually can kill anybody if it's given, if the what we call a viral load. So how much you're inoculated with. If somebody has coronavirus and spits in a cup for an hour and you drink that, yummy, that sounds good, doesn't it? Then you have a ton of that virus in you, and you're probably going to have a really bad outcome. You're going to have that disease really, really severely because you put a ton of viruses in there all at once. And if you remember what I said about a virus is not alive. It doesn't have any activity. It passively floats by and sticks onto your cells and gets pulled into your cells, and then it cracks open, and the genetic material inside of that virus goes into your genes, and it changes your cell and makes that cell make a lot of that virus and pump it out. Now there's more virus to infect more cells. And at some point, you have more cells doing the work of the virus than your body can handle because your cells are being hijacked. And you run out of resources. You run out of the ability to keep your body going because all of your cells have been duped into producing this virus. And that depends on how well your immune system responds to it. So let's think that through. If I get exposed to one virus and it gets into one cell and causes one cell to rupture and produce 100 more viruses, and those 100 then attach to 100 other cells, and they all produce 100. Now we're at 10,000, right? And so it grows really rapidly, right? And that's assuming that every cell gets infected. And I'm being simplistic here. Versus if I take in 10 million to begin with, and I have 10 million infected cells right off the bat, and all of those 10 million cells produce 100, and they all dump out there, like we're in big trouble really quickly, no matter how good my immune system is. Now in the standard case, and it's not just one, I'm being simplistic here, it would definitely take more than one virus particle. Well, I can't say definitely, almost certainly. I find it really hard to believe that you could just get one virus particle into your immune system and that would, into your body, and it would overwhelm your immune system. But if let's say if we just got one in there and that one goes undetected and attaches to a cell and it ruptures out 100 more, right? Well, if my immune system's really clever and really robust, and it's just there's a ton of immune function going on there and analyzing all of these things in a very robust way, and there's a lot of them around. Just think of it like law enforcement. If you have military like sitting around a town doing law enforcement versus like one cop or handful of cops in New York City or something like that. You would have a disparity in how quickly you could get the perpetrators. And so if you just get one and it attaches and you rupture out 100, if my immune system's shit hot and it catches on when there's only 100 and it starts producing antibodies, and then my immune system kills that in like the next 3 or 4 replications, and I don't really get sick. Now I got the virus and I developed antibodies to it, so now we are pretty sure there's some durable immunity to this, meaning that I'm very unlikely to get it again, at least in the short term. From what we've seen, we won't know until we've extrapolated this experiment out for a year or so. We'll know kind of how durable the immunity is. So if we have a mask on and we're putting less out there, then it's more likely that when you're exposed, and if this virus sticks around for a couple of years, everybody on the planet is going to be exposed to it, right? Just like herpes virus has been around for, decades, hundreds, if not thousands of years. And if you do serology tests, if you test people's antibodies for it, it's like 99% of all humans show they show antibodies to herpes. It doesn't mean they have herpes. It means they've been exposed to it, and they're now have antibodies to fight it off if it were to rear up. So this might be the same case, and eventually everybody's going to be exposed to it. And what we're trying to do right now is slow down how quickly people get exposed to it to buy us some time. And to buy us some time to come up with a vaccine, and to buy us some time to understand it better, buy us some time to figure out how to mitigate it, right? How to treat it, what drugs can work. If we do put people in the ICU, if people need to go on innovation, is there some way of doing this that turns out better than others? And so that's that's really the question. So the mask is meant to prevent you from putting it out there so that you don't get a huge load to somebody who does contract it, especially somebody really susceptible to having a bad outcome on this. And therefore we can slow it down. We can buy ourselves some time so that if everybody's going to get exposed, we can decrease the number of people being really sick at a time, so we don't overwhelm the medical system. And over a long enough timeline, we can develop some sort of treatment to it that will prevent the outcomes from being as bad, and we can maybe cut the death rate down, by 50% or, more than that even, who knows. So the difference between putting a scarf around your mouth and wearing an N95 mask is substantial, but it's most substantial on what you breathe in, right? So if you say wear like a cravat, like a bandana around your mouth, and it's double layered over and you can breathe that way and you feel comfortable, it's over your nose and your mouth so that you're not pushing any of that out, it's probably pretty darn effective. Now, if you walk into a huge cloud of this airborne that you can't see, right? This airborne particles, is that small enough to go through the holes in the cravat? Yes, of course, but they won't all go through. So some of them will get stuck in there, and you won't get as big of a load, and you have a better chance of not having a really bad outcome. So a surgical mask is a little better. Same principles though. It doesn't filter out small enough particles, so it can still get through a surgical mask. The reason healthcare workers are wearing surgical masks is not to give it to other people, not to, if they're breathing in all the time and somebody comes in with the flu, well, you don't want to give them coronavirus on top of their flu. So that's the real reason for the surgical mask. And of course, it's reducing the viral load they're getting. And so as I was saying about the young people, the young healthcare workers, they're probably just getting really large viral loads, and that's why they're having bad outcomes. It seems the most likely to me. And of course, there's anomalies in somebody's immune system and unknown health issues and all of that. But keep in mind, they're newsworthy because they're the exception, and we'll talk about that. That's the last thing today. And so the N95 mask is basically like the best mask that we have. That's the Rolls Royce of this whole thing. But I did some research on the N95 mask. I'll take some feedback from anyone in the audience who knows more. But the N95 mask, from what I've researched, reliably will filter out 300 nanometers or bigger. And as I said, this is 70 to 90 nanometers. So nothing's an absolute, right? Just like think of it like a sieve. Like everything doesn't go through all at once. So maybe it reduces the intake of this by 100-fold or 1,000-fold, but it seems like it could still get through. But that's going to reduce the healthcare workers' risk of bringing it in from other people, right? And so that's why they're saying, N95 for healthcare workers and surgical masks for healthcare workers, because we're running low on them, and you can get away with just a scarf. Do we need to do that? We don't know, but is it a big deal to put a scarf around your mouth when you go to the grocery store? Not a big deal. So let's do that. Let's be responsible members of the community. Okay. And again, because we're going to decrease how quickly we give it to people, and how much they get, right? So what we're really trying to do, and this is the real meat of it, let me share my screen here. What we're really trying to do with this is, what we're really doing here today is we are trying to figure out, oh, no, it gets right in my way there. Should we wear a mask? Do we need to wear a mask? Again, this was from yesterday's video. This is just to keep things relative. We'll come back to this. But here's the answer as to whether or not we need a mask, and should we be really scared if this thing is actually airborne? The answer is, in my opinion, it doesn't matter. And here's why. Because again, what's being reported now is all the headlines is 1.1 million coronavirus cases. Not true. In the medical world, there is a very, very, very important distinction between somebody who's been infected and somebody who has the disease. So what we have evidence of is 1.1 million people being infected by the virus, okay? 61,000 deaths, and this is over approximately, I think China's deaths started tolling up in November. So from November to now, 61,000 deaths. Probably not accurate, but it's the most accurate number we know out of all this. This is how many people have had it and cleared it and no longer have any symptoms. And this is the number of active cases. So we have 840,000. Yesterday we had 1 million cases and 750,000. So that, that kind of stacked up a little quicker than it should be. But here's the important thing. We're going back historically. We're going all the way back to November when people started dying to today. We didn't know a lot about it in November. We don't know a lot about it now, but we're learning more things. But regardless of what we learn, whether we find out that this is the most contagious virus ever, or this stays in the air and takes so long to settle that it essentially is just going to populate the entire planet and everybody's going to be exposed to this. The answer is it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because here's the numbers. 95% of all people who get this have mild conditions, and that's not even true. 95% of all people that we tested positive have a mild condition, meaning they don't need medical help. They get sick. And you see reports, oh, this is the worst flu. This is so much worse than the flu. Okay, maybe it's way worse for you. Maybe it's the worst illness of your life. But guess what? You don't even get any medical attention 95% of the time, even if you think it's horrible, and you're going to get past it. Now, 5% are serious or critical, and that 5% go over here and they either recover or they die. And about 20% of them will die, which is 1 out of 5, which is approximately 1% worldwide of everybody who we know gets infected, right? The truth is, it's at least twice that number, and most likely it's 10 times that number, because a lot of people don't show any symptoms whatsoever and they never know they had it. So this is even far less than 5% people are going to have a critical condition. But even if it were 5%, this has held steady and the virus hasn't changed. So it doesn't matter that it's still 5%. And again, we need to be honest about this. The people who are at the highest risk of this are the elderly. But that isn't new either, right? If you're 80 years old and you get in an automobile accident, you're much more likely to die than if you're 20 years old and you get in an automobile accident. If you fall, if you get sick from any source, if you have a heart attack at 80 versus a heart attack at 50, huge difference in how likely you are to survive. And I'm not being glib. I mean, I have loved ones in this age group that are at high risk. I don't want them to die. Of course, I'm going to do my best to prevent myself from causing them any harm. But of course, they're going to be eventually they're going to be exposed to this virus, and once they get exposed to this virus, they're going to have a good outcome or a bad outcome. So this isn't equally represented. If you're 25 years old, your odds of being this 5% are almost zero. I mean, it would be a rounding error. It would be rounded to zero. It would be such a small percentage. So you essentially have no chance. Doesn't mean you won't see the rare case where somebody young and otherwise healthy dies. And again, we've talked about some possible reasons for that. So let's take heart in that. Okay, let's take heart in the fact that 95% of people are going to have a mild condition if they're diagnosed, and 100% of people who get infected and never get tested obviously had a mild case. So there's a really, really good chance you're not going to have anything more severe than just a coldish, fluish, type of condition, and maybe it's the worst cold ever. So if we refresh this probably isn't right. We look down and see that's right for today. It takes a while to update these. We probably have more than that, but if we look at yesterday, we had worldwide, we had a little under 6,000, a little bit fewer than 6,000 deaths. Okay, in a single day, that seems like a lot, right? I mean, anybody would say, well, 6,000 people, that's a lot of people. So let's look back at something else. Let's go to just regular population data on this worldometer and go to world population, and we can see the total number of births today and the total number of deaths today. Now, what this will end up being over the course of the day is going to end up being somewhere between 150,000 and 200,000. But here's the important number. So 15.2 million people have died this year. That's just since January. So let's do some quick math on that. Since January 1st, we've had 15 million people. I'll just round it off and say we had 6,000 deaths from coronavirus, which, keep in mind, actually goes back before January. But let's just say this all happened since January. And we divide that by 15.2. Well, can't put a point in when you're doing it that way. Oh, silly Kirk. 15 there we go. Divide that, and that leaves you with a 0.04% chance of dying from coronavirus as things currently stand, which means all comers, all age groups, all health categories across the entire world, if you've died since January till today, there's a 99.96% chance that you've died from something other than coronavirus, whether or not it's airborne. It just doesn't matter. The virus is going to do what the virus is going to do. We are going to do our best to mitigate against it. What you can do right now is the same things we've always been able to do. Really quickly, let's look at this again. I've brought this up almost every time. This is the CDC's pandemic guide for what do we do when things get really bad, and we base it on how many people we're expecting to die, how contagious this thing is, what is the communicability of this. We'll talk next time about that number, reproductive number. And again, you can look at here are the interventions you can do if you're not a healthcare provider. You can stay home. You can voluntarily quarantine household members if they're sick. You can social distance in schools and workplaces, and wash your hands more, all of this stuff. Wearing masks isn't even on here. Of course, you can wear a mask. But if you look at, things become recommended here in categories 2 and 3, which was, like I said, that was, let's see, what is that? That's categories 2 and 3 is we're expecting between 90, basically between 100,000 and a million deaths, really. And then 1 million to 2 million, and then over 2 million is kind of where and I'm rounding, obviously. But it isn't until you get to categories 4 and 5, right? Which is basically we're saying over 1 million people are expected to die from this. And then, and keep in mind, this is Americans we're talking about, this isn't worldwide. Over 1 million people are expected to die from this, then we're going to recommend everything. Well, we're doing everything right now, and we've even added masks to this now. So we're doing everything we can. Most of us, if not all of us, are going to be exposed to this virus in the not too distant future, next couple of months, next couple of years. I don't know exactly what that is. The longer that takes, the better the chances are that we have more resources to guard against it. Also, the longer that takes, the less frequent that it will become. The tail will die off, because as people get infected, develop antibodies, and clear it, they're no longer somebody who might infect somebody else. And so now you've reduced the number of people who could possibly give this to somebody else. And you've reduced the number of people who are going to need medical resources. And so that gives us more time to develop treatments, and it gives us more resources to treat people who do have severe and serious outcomes with this. So I hope I have answered that question. I have lots of other stuff that I want to talk about, but for now, let's just leave it there. Cover your mouth when you go out into public, and you could be giving it to somebody else. If you live in a house with somebody who is at high risk for this, I would recommend, keeping your social distance. If this is airborne and you live in a small house with small rooms, you might want to consider wearing masks if you live with grandma. And until this is until we know more, until we have more resources to handle this. And again, I'm not recommending policy. I'm telling you from my logical standpoint, none of this is meant to be medical advice. This is Kirk Parsley's opinion. Kirk off the wall. Take it or leave it. This costs $3.99, absolutely nothing. You can dismiss it if you don't agree with me. And I'm just trying to settle everybody down. Let's get rid of these super scary terms like, oh, it's airborne, now we're all doomed. Nope, it's the same virus that was around 6 months ago, whether it was airborne then or airborne now, doesn't matter. It's the same virus that's been around. Infection rates aren't going up. Bad outcomes aren't going up. We're dealing with the same enemy, regardless of whatever the enemy's tricks are to get it to us. We're dealing with the same ones. We need to keep focused on what we're doing. We need to take care of our health. We need to take care of our community, and we need to be, good citizens in a way that we get back to work as quickly as possible. We allow our policymakers and scientists to come to conclusions and recommend things that we can all go out and try. Everybody has everyone's best interest at heart here. We're trying to get people back. It makes a lot of sense to get healthy people back to work who don't have a huge risk of having a bad outcome with this. Getting them to wear masks, washing their hands, all of the stuff that we know we can do. There's a lot of good rationale between, if you live in an area that has a lot of healthcare facilities, it's very well prepared to deal with bad outcomes. You don't have a huge population. You don't have a huge elderly population. Let's try getting some people back. This is going to take some time. We're going to have to niggle with it. We're going to have to go back and forth. We're not exactly sure how to move forward. But the overall message of this is that your risk, whether this is airborne or not, has not changed in the last day or the last month or the last week. It's the same as it's always been. If you have no comorbidities and you're under 65 years old, you're otherwise healthy, you get a reasonable exposure to this, sort of a normal viral load, your odds that you're going to have a really bad outcome are exceedingly small and not worth concerning yourself with, because as I said, 6,000 people have died from this. Man, 60,000 people have died from this, right? Did I mess up the math? I might have messed up the math. If I messed up the math, then it's 99.6 and not 99.96. But either way, your odds of dying from this, your odds of getting severely sick from this are exceedingly low. The people who have died this year, over 99% of them have died from something else, and they haven't died from coronavirus. So that's the name of that tune. That's all I have for today. That was 30 minutes. I was sure I was going to do it in 10 minutes, but apparently it takes me a while to say all this. So I hope that was informative and helpful. Sleep, eat good food, stay active, control your stress, be a good steward of your neighbors, be a good community member, don't get angry and nasty with each other. Let's everybody work together. Everybody's going to have a different threshold for how much concern they're holding with this, but you hold your concern. Move forward knowing that you're going to be all right. You're going to come out of this. If you're over 70 years old right now, you have a more of a chance of dying from coronavirus than you did a year ago because coronavirus didn't exist. But you're not necessarily going to die from this. It's not like everybody over 70 is going to die from this. There's a 101-year-old man in Japan, I think, who's recovered from this. So it's not a death sentence if you're older and you do get it. You just have a higher chance, and I think it's I don't know, something like a 15% chance if you're over 80 years old. But again, if you're over 80 years old and you get in a car crash, you fall off a ladder, you fall off a curb, you get sick, you get pneumonia, like your odds are higher, like your risk of death is higher. Anyway, we don't know that it's substantially higher. We're just tracking this really, really closely. If we knew every single death of every single category, there would be many more things to be scared of, right? You're hundreds of times more likely to die from a heart attack, and you're not worried about a heart attack this morning. Don't worry about this. Like, do what you can do, keep your focus, keep moving forward. We're going to get through this.